So in this one, let's continue the discussion about the difference between experience and practice and judgment. How do we know if we're making progress or not?
Yes, that's a very important question. And so last time we started with this idea of where is judgment coming from? Is judgment coming from experience or past, or many feelings that you had, different feelings that you experience maybe by yourself or because you were guided by a somatic teacher. So that's your somatic experience. Sometimes it's called the embodied cognition. And some people say that yes, you can form correct judgment with this kind of very low level experience. But Alexander was saying that, well, he didn't believe in this idea. He destroyed the idea, saying that judgment should come from reason practice, from experiments. And experiments are guided by reasoning. There is a reasoning previous to the experience. And then you can judge the experience because it's also going to be an experience, a somatic experience, but then you can judge the experience, yes, on the basis of the reasoning that you've placed before and the questions you have asked yourself. So this may sound very complex, but today I want to well, somehow discuss the same ideas and relate it with what we've been working on for the last, I don't know, 6 or 7 videos previous to the last one, and it was the guiding orders, the directions. So in order to discuss this with a sound base, I'm going to just listen to Alexander. Have you listened to what Alexander is writing in constructive conscious control? So here it is. I'm going to first share this so that you can see what I'm talking about. So we are in constructive conscious control. It's a very interesting chapter called sensory appreciation. So sensory appreciation is the basis of experience. Yes. And so Alexander is talking about a difficulty. So here it is. Another difficulty which pupils make for themselves is in connection with the giving of guiding orders or directions. They speak sometimes as if it were a strange and new thing to ask them to give themselves orders, forgetting that they have been doing this subconsciously from their earliest days. Else, they will not be able to stand up without help, much less move about. So when I read this, I have to set myself into the context, and the context is that there is a pupil, and we can see that the pupil has a faulty coordination of the different parts of the torso. Alexander folds the problems in the neck, the stiffness in the neck and the position of the head in the wrong organization of the movements of the different parts of the torso. So Alexander is going to ask the pupil to give himself guiding orders of different nature. But the effective performing orders are going to be orders of movements. Yes, the movement that the pupil has to do in order, for example, to stand up. So we have a pupil that has been, standing up. And at the end of that gesture, we can see that the pupil is displaying some visual symptoms that we can notice, or we could even measure using simple rulers. For example, there is a very simple thing. You can place a ruler on the top of your sternum and trace the sternum with the body of the ruler. And you will then get an incline or a vertical line. Yes? The same can be done with the opposite part, with the lower part of the back. You can place a ruler in such a way that the ruler body will touch both the sacrum plate, back of the sacrum, and also the middle of the thoracic vertebrae. once again, the line is going to be different whether you have the back, the line is going to be absolutely straight and vertical, or if you have the back forward. If you have the back forward, of course, the line is going to be inclined. So we will see a discrepancy between the line at the front of the upper torso and the line at the back of the lower torso. These symptoms are the results, according to Alexander, to the guiding orders or direction that the pupil has given himself subconsciously during the gesture of going from, or during what Alexander called the act of going from sitting to standing. These different shapes, the form is not a problem with the bones or a problem with the muscles. It's not that certain muscles are too tense and other too lax, as many people that are really focused on muscle, that don't want to see anything else than muscle, will tend to tell you. In fact, the pupil has given himself orders and has obeyed these orders of movement. He has moved the middle torso in a certain direction. He has compensated by moving the upper torso backward. And the shape we see is just the result of a coordination of movements. Well, judgment of the coordination of movements is based not on experience. We don't feel what it is for the pupil to be like this. Of course, the pupil has done this in order to maintain his balance. This is not just a simple habit. It's a functional habit that has a purpose, that has a function for that person. The person feels upright and feels balanced in this way. The equilibrium, somatic sense, or embodied cognition requires this movement to be performed. That's how the person feels upright. That's how the person feels even, you would be surprised, but straight. Person feels straight then, yes? And feels balance. The way the weight is set on the feet when the person is projecting the middle torso forward and the upper torso back in this way, shortening the back, protruding the abdomen. Well, this experience of the weight on the feet is right for that person. Yes, that's her judgment. Her judgment is based on her experience or somatic embodied cognition. Well, our judgment is different, but it's not based on what we feel. We don't feel much when we look at a person doing this. Uh, I've had people say, "Oh, I can't look at these people. Their use feels so bad." That's a very strange statement to make. You don't feel bad because you look at something that is bent. There is no reason to feel bad for that. Yes, you just, well, notice that the person must have done a series of movements, and it can be quite intellectually challenging to think about it once more and to think, what have I seen when in the act of standing up? How did that person start moving the lower torso, the middle torso, the upper torso? This is challenging. This is interesting. This is not, well, a stimulus for pain or for discomfort. There is no discomfort in this. You have to forget about this and look at the situation very calmly. You see, if there is discomfort, of course, you're going to bring into the situation something. And as a teacher, it's very important to understand that when a pupil is performing an act of standing up that ends up in this way, well, the person is not in any danger. The person has done that all her life, no problem. Yes, so we can take this with distance, with equanimity, and just start to reason about which movements are coordinated in order to perform that form. The form is the result of movements. So there is nothing special, says Alexander, in giving oneself orders. The only problem is that the pupil is not aware that he's giving himself a series of orders, that there are a series of movements involved in performing such S-bent movements. No, the pupil has one order: stand. I want to stand, and I stand. And what is happening with the toes, with the ankle, with the knees, with the sitting bones movement, or the movement of the front of the pelvis, the movement of the middle torso, the movement of the upper torso, and the arms, and all this. The pupil has no concern about this. He knows how to stand, and he just does it according to one instruction. So the pupil, of course, there is no big deal in saying that the pupil is doing and according to a series of orders, but the pupil will not believe that. The pupil has never thought in that way, and it's going to be necessary to approach the subject, well, progressively, so that the pupil will then, we will ask the pupil to notice that some movements are happening. And the very important point at one moment is to ask the people whether it can stop some of these movements from happening. That's the crucial moment when there is the decision and obeying the decision. So we don't start with the decision. We start with the capacity that the pupil has to resist obeying a decision. That's the point. So Alexander seems to make very little of the fact that the pupil doesn't know that he's giving himself orders, right? And these are series of orders of movement that are happening simultaneously. Yes, so that's the first little problem that I see here. And the second you will find is that now when we go into the second part, he says that you will see that uh, his way of entering into communication with the pupil is to ask the pupil to suddenly give himself conscious orders. That's what we are going to explore now. So Alexander is speaking. The point that is new in the scheme we are considering is that the pupil is asked consciously to give himself orders, evolved from a consideration of the requirements, not of a subconscious, but of a conscious reasoning use of the organism. Orders and direction, moreover, the satisfactory employment of which depends on the pupil's clear understanding, one, as to which of these orders are primary, to be given but not to be carried out, inhibition, and second, as to which are to follow and to actually be carried out. So Alexander is saying that the judgment of the pupil was based on a subconscious decision to do one act. Now we are going to start to analyze the act with the pupil. And in this analysis, we are going to reason out how it would be best to use the structure and which movements should enter into the organization of the form and which movements should not, which movements should be stopped. So Alexander starts from a very wide perspective, saying that, first of all, if we are to change the coordination of movements, it's better to start with an act that involves movements. We are not going to try and say to the pupil, you are going to change the way you stand. We say to the pupil, we are going to observe and see if you can change the act of sitting down or the act of standing up. Because these acts for the pupil will create less difficulty than a static position. Because for the pupil, it's very difficult to imagine in the first lesson that a static position like standing, for example, or sitting is made of movements. It's much easier to say that, well, when you finish standing up from the chair, this is how we see you standing. So from a reasoned point of view, we can say that it's the cause of that form in standing is the organization of the movement of the different parts during the act of standing up. And so if you are able to change the movements that compose the act of standing up, the form in standing up should be seen as different. And this is the way we can manage to bring the pupil toward the reason conception of an act, and also later the reason conception of a form. The form is in this way conceived as being made of movements. This is absolutely fundamental. It's absolutely fundamental when we discuss orders to understand that we are discussing orders of movements or orders of refusing to perform some movements. Okay, so the clear understanding that we are talking about is not explicit here. Alexander is talking about the orders that are, well, orders of definite inhibition and orders of definite performance. Is not really putting forward, as I do, this basic fact that orders or guiding orders can only be guiding orders of movements. It's completely different to try and change the tone of muscle, to change the tension of muscle, to try and in fact direct the connection of the energy of this or that. These are all concepts that have very, very little reason basis, really. There are far too many muscles, and we don't know how the many muscles are going to be involved in every movement. It's not humanly possible to, in fact, discriminate which muscle is doing what and how much a muscle should participate. Well, of course, when a muscle is absolutely shortened, you can imagine that, yes, the muscle has to lengthen, but to lengthen the muscle, what you need is a movement of the different parts to which the muscle is attached. Thinking that lengthening a muscle can be a direct order from the mind is from the start the wrong conception. If you do move the different parts, the different bony parts to which that tissue, muscular tissue, or any other tissue is attached, then you can start to imagine a geometry in which you are, in fact, lengthening the tissue. But lengthening the tissue by direct order is just engaining. That's the position of the initial Alexander technique very clearly. Yes? So Alexander is not stating the nature of the orders, and this has created immense difficulties for pupils and teachers alike. Yes? So here we have to, well, see which are the orders to be performed. There are orders that have to be actually carried out. A coordination of movements can be requested from the pupil. We want to see when the pupil is having the lesson, the pupil is filmed, and we want to see with the pupil on film whether he's been able to carry out a series of order or not. We want to see whether he has been able to organize his mind so as to keep in mind a series of instructions. Is it possible to think of more than one thing at once? This is even more important than the position in standing or the coordination in going from standing to sitting or sitting to standing. What is basic for people nowadays is this capacity to translate instructions into action, to relate the word they use with themselves, their self-speech, with actions. That's if a person gets more and more capable of well, planning and performing series of actions that have been previously reasoned, well, the person is more and more in control of their life. Yes? And this has nothing to do with feelings. This has nothing to do with trauma. This has to do with the capacity of the person to organize a speech so that she can enter into action. So Alexander wants to make this clear. Let's see if he's successful. To make this clear, let us suppose that a pupil is asked by his teacher to sit down. Now, if he obeys this order at once and sits down, he will be guided in doing so by the unreliable sensory appreciation established in connection with the performance of the act in his case. That is, he will simply repeat his usual faulty subconscious manner of sitting down. Fine. This is quite clear. Yes. The teacher is going to request the act of sitting down to the pupil. Well, the only way the pupil knows of to sitting down is to give himself the order to sit down. He's very, very accustomed to this, and just perform a series of orders that are below his consciousness. If the pupil just obeys the order, he will act below the consciousness, and there is no conscious guidance and control involved. So, of course, if you want to train or help the person to train herself to use instructions and rules, well, it's the first rule to remember is that when I'm receiving one unique order, I shall not do anything. And this is a really important training if you want to learn to perform planned structures of movements or plan structures of decisions of any kind. If you are just into obeying one order or trying to feel what one order, when obeyed, would feel like, you will never enter conscious guidance and control. Never. So yes, the first step is to understand what is setting you wrong. What is setting you wrong is giving yes and obeying a single order at a time. And you have to understand that it's the way speech is constructed. We can only give ourselves orders one at a time in speaking. It's impossible to give two orders at the same time in speaking. The orders in speaking come one after the other. And so every time I give myself an order, there is the danger that I act on this order. And the danger is real. The danger is so obvious when you watch a video of your lessons. When I watch a video of my practice, well, it's obvious how many times I tend to react to one feeling, one order, one intention. The whole idea of the technique is a coordination of intentions, the coordinations of movements, yes, the coordinations of instructions. So it is very important also to understand something else, is that we are giving the pupil suddenly the capacity to train himself to say no to one order at a time. So when the order is said that, okay, go on, sit down, we are preparing the way for change. Learning to say no is not change in itself. Well, especially if you pupil, because from the point of view of the pupil, you have to understand that, of course, when the pupil is starting to say no, he's saying no to actions, yes? But how is the pupil organized when he says no? Is for the moment according to the old subconscious activity. Or in the case of the photo you're looking at the moment, it's not absolutely not a beginner. We can see already that the line of the sacrum to the back and the line of the sternum are starting to get quite organized. It's absolutely clear these lines are not parallel yet, but because when they are parallel, it means that the torso is fully expanded. But it's clear that even after starting the movement to sit down, this pupil is already capable of having the middle and lower back organized. And we can see that the upper torso is still not organized according to a reasoned geometry. it's still obvious that the sternum top is further back than the middle sternum, so that the person is arching the upper back slightly and shortening a little bit. Yes, the pupil is shortening a little bit. So when the pupil is saying no to sitting and organizing himself, for the moment, is the fact of saying no has not changed or improved the coordination from what it was just a minute ago, or the habitual experience of sitting of that person is not changed. It's just not made worse. Saying no to a unique order is just a step, and it's certainly not the final step. It's a step that is fundamental to opening the way for something new, for something unknown. So that's what Alexander is going to say now. The object of this reeducation is to eradicate such psychophysical faults. And so, as soon as he is asked to sit down, the pupil immediately says no and give himself the order not to sit down, thereby inhibiting the misdirected activity hitherto connected with the act, a procedure which prevents the indulgence in the old subconscious faults. So, this is where we have to be very careful, because when Alexander says that saying no to the isolated order of generating a response to one instruction, he says that this is a procedure that prevents indulgence in the old subconscious faults. Not yet. There is a possibility of preventing indulgence in the old subconscious fault. Well, but if the person gives himself performing orders of movements of the different parts to change the orientation of the different parts and different orientations of the parts. Saying no is not just going to bring a correct organization of the different movements. No way. We are just on a statu quo for the moment. You are just saying, well, fine, I am not going to exaggerate any of this by giving consent to doing something according to one instructions. I need to learn coordination. Coordination supposes many orders at the same time. So I will refuse to do one order, but I must assume from that I am not re-educated and my form has not changed because I said no. My form is still the old form. So now that no is said, I am not going to, in fact, engage into performing the old subconscious movements. I am going to, well, now give consent to voluntary, deliberate, reasoned actions that are reasoned in view of the organization of the whole mechanism of the torso. So, saying no is obviously very important. If you want to coordinate 3 actions, you have to say no to each action. Each instruction of action should be met with a completely placid response. No response is necessary to a single instruction. It sounds very simple. In fact, it's a constant struggle, not only for students, for my pupils, for the teachers who are working with me. No, for me too, for anybody. Refusing to act according to one order is it's an ongoing struggle. It's very funny how one can be, in fact, caught. And Alexander gives us a clue here, because he says that the say no is inhibiting the misdirected activities hitherto connected with the act. That means that different acts that we perform during the day are also connected with each act is connected with a series of misdirected activities. No, be careful, because if you are able to say no just before the act of sitting, doesn't mean that you're able to say no in the act of standing. The struggle is on. It's for each activity, when we film ourselves, we discover that the process of inhibition has to be refined depending on the act. So that is something to have in mind. Now, the old activity being prevented by the process indicated, saying no, the pupil will then proceed to give his attention to the different guiding or directing order, which the teacher considers essential to the correct direction and control of those psychomechanics, the correct means whereby, concerned with the satisfactory use of the organism as a whole in the act of sitting down. These are the orders to be ultimately carried out by the pupil. So we say that, okay, we are going to prevent the old faulty activity, because if even if I have a single order and I try to make it good, most people will try to make the order feel good because they think that they will memorize an order that feels good better than an order that doesn't feel anything. It's uh, it's something we have to deal with at each lesson. So I'm not going to go very far in this, but the old activity, the old series of movement that were involved in the act of going to, for example, to sit, are stopped. Okay, I'm not going to sit in the way, in the manner in which I do sit habitually. And so that's where the pupil need help, because what is that manner in which the pupil normally sits? These are a series of questions that the lessons are going to uncover. What is it you're doing with your ankle when you start sitting? Most of the time, the pupil has no conception of what happens, what he's doing with his ankles. So, do you know that one of your ankle is rotating more than the other? No. Would you be interested in watching which one is rotating more than the other? Do you know in which direction? Is it externally or internally that you rotate the ankle? Most of the time, the pupil has no clue. Does the pupil know that one knee goes faster forward than the other when he bends the knees? Well, the pupil has no idea, but it's easy to reason out and to find out that, of course, as you've got two legs, that these two legs are connected with the pelvis, and the pelvis is the base of the spine, to which the spine is rigidly attached. If every time you start sitting, one knee goes faster than the other, one knee rotates more inward than the other because the ankle is rotating, well, it's easy to understand that the pelvis is going to rotate. And if the pelvis rotates, as the two legs are exactly of the same height, when one side of the pelvis is going to be higher than the other, and the spine is going to, well, deviate on one side. There is nothing dangerous in this. It's just functional scoliosis. But the point is not that it is dangerous. The point is, do you think you could stop rotating that one ankle more than the other? This is where we are starting to give attention to the different guiding orders which are essential for lengthening the spine. You cannot imagine lengthening the spine when the spine bends, because lengthening the spine has to do with, of course, reducing the bending, different bendings that you can find either in the frontal view or in the sagittal view, either looking at the person from the front, or filming from the front, or filming from the side. And it's absolutely obvious that if the person bends on one side, on the frontal view, well, there's going to be some compensation in the sagittal view too. So reasoning orders according to the satisfactory use of the organism as a whole, you have to think for yourself, well, of course, the organism as a whole, that's a bit complex, but there is something that is evident, is that the central mechanism is the mechanism of the torso. That's where 80% of the spine is in fact organized. So if you want to organize your spine to lengthen, well, you have to start to think and connect the movements of the different parts with the movement of the parts of the mechanism of the torso. This is the way of the initial Alexander technique. And these are the orders to be ultimately carried out by the pupil. The pupil will refuse to act on one order at a time, or well, struggle to do so, and strive to do so. But the idea is to also learn to obey positive orders, how to control. Also, Alexander makes a distinction between giving attention to the guiding and directing orders. So we can make that distinction too. We can give flesh to that idea. These are the guiding orders. The different guiding orders are orders of movements, and the directing orders are the orders that direct you to not do a movement. So there is also orders of definite performance and order of definite inhibition inside the guiding orders. And so from there, we will see that once the pupil has inhibited going into action according to one instruction, space is open to see and experiment whether the pupil is able to give himself guiding or directing orders and affect his performance. So this is a reason experience. So we call it an experiment. It's not a feeling experience of what is right. It is a guided experiment and a control experiment in which the pupil will see how he engages into the action, into the act on film afterwards. So he will hear the orders that are given. Most of the time, the orders I give the orders to the pupil, and the pupil has the order in mind and then start acting on it. And the very point of the experiment is not to see if the pupil is really changing the shape, if the pupil is now lengthening and widening the torso. That is secondary. What is really important here is the capacity of the pupil to translate these verbal intentions into action. This is what the learning, this is where the learning is happening. If the pupil is starting to get, well, more and more able to translate very clear, explicit instruction into coordinated actions, well, the pupil is gaining freedom from his feeling sense. Instead of reacting to how he feels at the moment he's performing something, no, what he feels at the moment where he's performing something is not very important. The pupil doesn't need to feel in order to know whether he's performing correctly or not. He doesn't need to. He knows that if he tries to feel how he's doing while he's performing the, in fact, readjustment of the structure, that is most of the time timed very shortly so that the pupil has not really the time to indulge into what do I feel when I do this? Do I feel right when I do that? When I do these three things together? Well, any concern about this kind of experience is going to ruin the conscious guidance and control system. The person is going to discover on screen after viewing this kind of experiment going on that he's lost it. He's returned to his habitual coordination of the movement based on his somatic cognition. So suddenly, sensory appreciation becomes an hindrance. It's not helping to perform anything. It's in fact keeping the person in the old organization, in the old manner of thinking, in the old manner. If the old manner of thinking is in place, the old manner of use will also be viewed on the event field by the camera. So now, the pupil is getting more capable of using verbal speech, and that will mean a complete change of outlook, because very often we are subject to our thinking. We are subject to the voices in our head. We are repeating all the time things, but we are hearing what we repeat all the time. Here, there is a neat break. Here, we have conscious orders that are defined in a reasoned manner, and this brings, wow, such a peace of mind. It's not, the peace of mind we are talking about is not something that is a feeling. No, it's more something like a prevention against feeling too much, against being submerged by feelings of, I don't know, there are many feelings that are very adverse that people do not realize how much they affect their capacity of action. So we free the capacity of action, yes, and on a secondary basis, of course, we reorganize the mechanism of the movements of the parts of the torso, and therefore we improve the functioning, the physical functioning. But the physical functioning is not the first aim of the lessons, not at all. The first aim of the lesson is to bridge the gap between verbal theory, verbal instructions, verbal rules, and on the other side, actions. How do we combine and reunite word and action? It follows, that's Alexander speaking now, then, that the orders which are to be given but not to be carried out are those which, if carried out, would result in the habitual faulty use of the mechanisms. They can therefore be referred as preventing orders. All orders which follow, preventing orders, are to be carried out, at first by the teacher. For if the teaching technique is reliable, such order will be concerned with the correct means whereby the new and coordinated use of the mechanism can be secured. Um, so this is an old debate. There are preventive orders and there are performing orders. Nowadays, most teachers of the modern Alexander technique consider that no, all orders are preventing orders. Or if they are all preventing orders, they are all performing orders. But I stick to the text. There are preventing orders, so any orders that is concerned with one action, one act, whether that act is a general gesture like sitting down or standing up, or whether it is, I don't know, releasing the ankle or turning the ankle or not turning the ankle, this order should not be met with obedience. You should resist, you should say, no, I am not going to do, I am involved in teaching coordination, so preventive orders are very, very clear. And of course, if we are considering the orders that, if carried out, would result in the faulty use of the mechanism, it's absolutely obvious that let the neck be free, for example, falls into that category. Because when you look at what happens when somebody gives the order to let the neck be free, you must realize that the goods are not there. You know, the actions that result from these orders are most of the time the habitual faulty use of the mechanism. The person is concentrating on the part and trying to improve that part, of course, trying to release, trying to do anything else. And all the rest of the movements of the parts of the mechanisms are not affected. The person is having the neck free with a body that is completely discoordinated. There are so many examples that you can just open your browser on the internet and look at the modern Alexander technique in action, and you will find surprising images where the torso is all but lengthened and widened. Look at how people walk, look at how people sit or go to stand, go up on the toes. Anybody can go up on the toes. It's not the problem. It's childish to go up on the toes. What is interesting is what are the movements of the different parts of the mechanism of the torso when the person is going up on the toes. So then you will discover that, wow, the person, yes, can go up on the toes, but there are faulty usage of the different movements of the parts of the torso from the start. And repeating neck free, head forward and up, back to lengthen and widen for years and years and years doesn't change anything about it. So these are preventing orders. These are in the group of the preventive orders. Of course, it's not one order at a time, but there is no idea of reason movement associated with let the neck be free, for example. Alexander explains many different parts of his books that there is a confusion between the cause and the consequence, because if any part of the neck is seen as stents, it's because of the faulty use of the mechanism of the torso. So if you go to the cause, you think, okay, I have to organize the mechanism of the torso in order for the neck to be free. So wishing the neck to be free is never going to organize the movements of the different parts of the mechanism of the torso. I work with modern Alexander teacher all week. They have lessons with me, and they discover that they have no idea of how to, or what are the movements of the mechanism of the torso that we want to inhibit, and which are the movements that we want to coordinate. They discover that back to lengthen and widen is a consequence, is a result, is an end. Now, what are the means to obtain that end is something else. And trying to wish for the end to arrive has nothing to do with conscious guidance and control. It's still the old end gaining solution. So this will give you an idea of this connection between reason practice and judgment. When you start observing how you go up, how you sit down, considering which movements are occurring, how these movements relate to the form of the mechanism of the torso, you start to create a new judgment of what is the coordination that is appropriate, that is the coordinate use of the mechanism as a whole, how it can be secured. It's only by directing this movement and directing this movement consciously that we can, in fact, progress toward reasoned use of the organism. Is
So,
that is that
so,
clear?
so for the sake
My
of
question?
for the sake of Alexander technique teachers who might be watching this, you've actually been through a STAT training course. So when you're talking about using these preventative orders, the neck free, head forward and up, back lengthening and widening, you've actually done all that as well. You're not just judging this from the outside. You've been through all this like they have.
Yeah, yeah. I've been very, very intent. I was one of the worst students of my training school. I really wanted this to work. I really followed the orders, and I gave myself the order: let the neck be free, head forward and the back to lengthen and widen, knees forward and away for years and years and years. And I also gave I don't know 3,000 lessons to pupils during my first years as teacher, using that same theory and practice, the modern Alexander technique. I was a teacher of the modern Alexander technique, but I was also capable of looking at myself and looking at my pupils, and I could see that there was some flow, some very, very deep flow in the process that I was teaching, because the results were not there. Of course, people had different feelings, and of course, on the feeling side, yes, it's absolutely fantastic to put hands on people, and it's reassuring, it's calming, it's everything. It's to me, it's like a patch. You can do something, and you can share something with people, and they can even feel better after it. But this is not conscious guidance and control, and it's not really learning in the way I consider now that learning should be. That means that when the person is learning to reason, which movements are in fact readjusting or disadjusting the mechanism of the torso. The person is not, leaning on me to have a correct experience. The person is starting to see for herself what is the real problem and what could be the avenue of experiments that could lead to some new ways, to some unknown organization that the person has never felt before, so that instead of relying on the past, on the experience, the person starts to really construct a future. And it's only when people construct a future that you can say that they are learning something. Somatic cognition is not something you learn. It's something maybe you absorb because you've been manipulated. But when you absorb it, the capacity of judging what you have absorbed, I found this at the end of my training course, because at the end of my training course, I was quite reinforced in the idea of that I had it right. That now I knew what lengthening and what neck free would mean. I had a somatic understanding of what it meant. I had a somatic understanding of every orders I was giving to my pupils, until I started to observe and to work with videos. Because when I saw myself performing certain acts, suddenly the somatic confidence, the somatic pump that has brought your confidence to a high, was suddenly dissolves completely, because you see what you're doing and you start to see what your pupils are doing too, and you think, but they are not progressing. They are not. They are regressing. They are going in more and more in the wrong way, feeling that something is right and not experimenting anything new. So yes, I've been through that. I have, I've done all. I've had the experience. It's in the past, but from there I started to reason about what Alexander is exactly performing when he gives lesson. What were our you know, the Alexander gives two lessons on film, and you look at his lessons and you look then at your own teacher lessons, and you think, but this is not at all the same thing. Alexander is doing things that are absolutely reasoned. It's obvious when you start analyzing his films, and I can tell you I've done so. It's absolutely obvious that he knows what he's doing. And when I was a teacher, I did not. Of course, I had the feeling in the hands, and I performed the dance as everyone else. But that doesn't mean that I knew. I had no reasoning behind it to back what I was doing. So uh, this is an experience, and I do not ask people to believe in the experience. I just ask people to start having lessons and experiment, reason procedures, and film these reason procedures and see for themselves whether what I say is just. I mean, am I reporting exactly what is happening on screen? Am I telling the person something wrong when I say that one ankle is turning more than the other, or that the person has one shoulder that is always acting faster than the other? The person can see it. And then the person can enter into a very interesting game. It's that when I give an order, I say to the person, well, could you slow down the movement of that knee? Well, the person has no idea whether she can. The psychomechanics of slowing down one knee is rather complex. You have to act both on, of course, the ankle, on the hip, because they control the knee, and you have also to organize your own equilibrium, because changing that speed is going to affect the base of the spine, as I explained earlier. So that means that the whole sense of equilibrium is going to change, and the person will have to try the new experiment against that feeling that is going to be a very unknown feeling for the person. Is the person ready to decide to perform actions that are going to feel wrong, that are going to feel uncomfortable, even to the point of disequilibrium, of feeling real disequilibrium. It's a very interesting aspect of the technique. It's what we call the aspect of the decision, making decisions. Not making decisions according to what you feel, making decisions no matter what you feel. And that is something I never encountered in the modern Alexander technique.
You don't really encounter that in other parts of life either. Okay, thank you, Jeando. We'll stop there. For everybody watching the video, if you check out the show notes underneath, you'll get links to Jeando's websites and where you can book a lesson with him. And we will see you in the next video. So thank you, Jeando. Goodbye.
Thank you, Kevin. Bye.